Welcome back to this show is not about menopause because menopause is just one day and that would make for a pretty short show. I am so happy you have chosen to tune in today. I am about to expose my personal list of favorite people. I want to introduce you today to my friend Colleen, who originally was a client and then a friend and then a mentor, and now we've recently added coach to Menopause Chicks. This is someone who I meet with every morning, every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m., usually in my pajamas, but luckily she agreed to join me in the studio today. So welcome, Colleen.
Thank you so much, Cheryl.
I'm so glad we're doing this. This is so cool. I want to begin by explaining to everyone, there's so many reasons why I would invite you onto my show called This Show Is Not About Menopause, but one of the main reasons is that I frequently tease you. I tease you by saying, hey, the reason I started Menopause Chicks is all your fault. And we kind of know what that means as our inside joke, but the real reason is that it's not your fault at all. You were my inspiration. You're a change maker. You're someone who sees the world through a different lens. Your work and you as a human being, you're someone that helps us understand different vantage points. So I wanted to invite you on here so that we could talk about that work, of what it means to be a change maker. So let's back up. Why don't you share with everyone the work that you did and what I'm actually referring to when I talk about being a change maker?
Thanks, Cheryl. The main focus of my work for a number of years was expanding on one word like menopause. The word was volunteer. Mm-hmm. And the way it's seen by many people is from a very different point of view than where I saw it, which was way more about understanding the talent that was out there, as opposed to only looking at people's hands. I thought it was important that we began to engage their brains. And everyone knows what volunteer means, and everyone has their own concept of volunteer. And very few people would think that it is actually quite complex when you really look at it. And many not-for-profit organizations do not engage the talent that's available for them. That really means they also can engage the whole community in a different way. So I spent probably the last decade of my career looking at that and examining it, and it was very frustrating because it's very different, just like you, which is why I think you say I got you into the menopause thing for the very same reason. So it was a struggle. We wrote a book. I had a co-author, Linda, who also
Yes.
has become a friend, and we did what we could in those years to change the landscape of community engagement to include what one of our people coined as a knowledge philanthropist. So that's what we did, and you were part of that. Thank you very much for that too.
Thank you for inviting me to be on your team to be a part of that. It certainly sparked the work that I've done for the last decade, but we continue to be on similar journeys in that, words matter. Words matter. And when we say words, because we can't always change them, I love the transition personally. I love the transition that you talk about from volunteer to knowledge philanthropist, because I know how that evolved and I have an understanding of it and I can picture it and sort of share your vision of that. But in my work, I continue to find myself in this place of saying the word menopause and the audience or the listener thinking that they already understand what it is I talk about every day. Now, you've been helping me with that because we talk about it every Wednesday morning. But, well, first of all, do you think I'm crazy for wanting to do this?
Oh, I think you're brilliant, and it's such a challenge to tackle anything that's considered to be a simple word that everyone understands, and to begin to re-educate the masses when you're only one person, which I tease you about all the time. You look like you have a staff of many, many people, and I know you're doing it just about all by yourself. So do I think you're maybe a little bit too many pairs of rose-colored glasses as you're trying to
Mm,
do this? I'm not sure. I,
yeah,
I, I applaud you for it, but I know how hard it is, Cheryl.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that in this world, there's work, and then there's things that we just absolutely know have to be done. Like, I picture myself in my rocking chair at the end of my days, and I kind of count off the things. And there's some things that I might have to compromise on. I love big, hairy, audacious goals, and I know you do as well. But I really would like to find your insights or your wisdom in how do we choose what can be compromised and what simply cannot be compromised, what we simply have to put our stake in the ground and say, no, this is different now. It's different now. This show is not about menopause for a reason.
Hmm. You really think I have an answer to that?
No, I think you have insights and wisdom because I know that
It's just,
you got to a place where you made a decision that yes, I'm going to do this and I may never get to that.
yeah. And it it's interesting because I do remember saying to you one time, asking you about what was happening, and you said you had no regrets. And I just recently
Mm.
listened to Daniel Pink's book about
Ah.
the power of regret, and thinking, maybe that's true. I would have to say, one of my regrets was that I didn't discover a way forward earlier in my career. By the time I
Mm.
discovered a way forward, or what I thought was a way forward, to change the meaning of the word volunteer in people's heads. Whereas we did go to that new term, whereas it's hard for you to go to a new term. And I, I wish I'd done it earlier. Maybe I would have been more successful had I discovered that path earlier. But you only discover where you're going by doing things. You don't know till you start. And I don't know how I would have started earlier. So balance, though, balance. What can you compromise and what can you not? It's in all walks of life. It's still there, even when you get to be a rewired person like me. So
I love that you brought up Daniel Pink's book, though. That's interesting because you and I have talked a lot about different thought leaders and authors, and even that title of that book, The Power of Regret, is a shift in thinking. It's a paradigm shift because
yes,
I was raised, somebody planted the phrase or the vernacular in my heart and mind that said you should live with no regrets. That's the golden rule. And now Daniel Pink is saying, maybe we can think about regret differently. And so that's all part of this conversation, right? Now we can think
right.
about how you planted the seed for how people and organizations can think differently about engaging people. And I'm trying to hopefully plant a seed in how we can rethink or even unthink what we thought we knew about something and rethink a way forward.
Yes. Rethinking, though, is hard to do to a large group of people. It's a few people
Mm,
at a time,
yeah.
and particularly when so many people like you are doing this online, you have literally hundreds of thousands of people listening to you. And how do we get to that place of of thinking about things in new ways and expanding the meaning of words. And I words are so important. You said that earlier, and I
Yeah.
think of the four agreements too, where the first agreement
Oh,
is
yeah.
be impeccable in your word, and
Right.
how critical that is, and how we're lazy and we aren't always impeccable in our words. So it's hard to do that to the masses, Cheryl.
That's another great reminder too about being impeccable and about learning to, stand up and stay your ground, even though it's hard and challenging and even frustrating, as you alluded to earlier. I want to
Yeah.
share a story with you. I had a meeting early this morning with a woman whose work I've followed for a very long time. Her name is Dr. Jillian Einstein. So already by saying her name, it's going to
Wow.
conjure up some expectations, and she is in fact a descendant of Albert Einstein's, and she works in women's brain health. So I'm very fortunate to be connected to this woman and her work and her team at the University of Toronto and the Women's Brain Health Initiative. And so we hop on a Zoom call, and the first thing she says to me is, "You don't look menopausal." Power of words, right? And so I don't even know how to take that because I haven't had a shower yet. I'm wearing my glasses. I'm sitting in my, in my pajamas in my office, as you often see me. And I'm like, so, okay, does she think I don't look old enough to be doing this work? Or does that word, which I really don't even like using it as an adjective, I don't say menopausal, does she mean that I don't look like I'm suffering? Do I not look depressed? Do I not look hot? Do I not look, whatever, all of the connotations that fall out of that word when someone says it? So I think it's really interesting, and it exists everywhere at every level of society and every level of the organizations that you used to work with. You say a word and it comes with all these different connotations.
I just had to grin when you said that. Do you look hot? You mean like hot, flashes hot. Whereas my grandchildren would, if they were calling you hot, that would be a huge compliment, actually, Cheryl. So even
I,
that word,
I
two
feel hot
different
today.
connotations.
I feel hot today because I'm wearing your Kelly green.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't actually expect you to have the answer for how we move forward from here, but I do think that you have some great insights for how we continue the conversation and keep challenging one another on this.
And I think a huge part of it for you, and we have talked about this, is how can you ensure it continues? Because it's
Mm,
not likely to be as well spread as you want, even in a decade, even in this
correct.
next decade. You've been at it for one decade, and you have another decade, I would say, my call ahead of you.
Yeah.
And how does it carry on after that? Like that's maybe one of the places where we don't always think far enough in the future. We're living too much in the present, which is a great way to live. But if you're going to ensure that it continues, maybe that's one of the things I see now. I don't know.
And this, folks, is where the coaching starts. This is this is the gold. This is the magic. Yeah. So if we are too much in the present, or I would say even too much blaming the past, then we aren't putting our energy into planning forward. So, what tips
Right.
and suggestions would you have for someone who's trying to shift a paradigm?
I do think it does, and this was always one of your strengths was the long-term planning, and
Mm,
and even just taking that time to look at how that could happen, even so, even that you don't only have an option B, you maybe have an option C and D as well as you go forward. And I know when you're overwhelmed with how much you have to do every day, that that looks challenging, but it's maybe the only way that you are going to be successful with the idea, which means you, in fact, may never get credit for it, but maybe someone else will in the future. And I know that would be okay with you. So
Yeah,
that would be one
100%.
suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah. And did you find that yourself with your own journey and your own work?
No, I wasn't smart enough to do that. So now I can look back and think maybe that would have been a much better idea. I don't know. And maybe it wouldn't work even then. I have watched a few really strong women who have been leaders of not-for-profit organizations leave their role and have the whole organization absolutely decimated by the people who follow them. And I've watched one woman here in Calgary who didn't want that to happen and chose a way different route. And I'm watching it seriously to see what happens with her organization. That she just decided to do it a little bit differently, and I see why she did, because we knew a lot of the same people who watched this happen to their organizations, and there's not much you can do after you leave, but can we set up differently to ensure that the idea, that the magic moves on? Is there a way we can do it? I think there is.
Yeah, how do we set up that the idea becomes contagious, right?
Right.
Yeah. Listen, I know that you are a voracious reader, and we do talk about words a lot. So I am hoping that you'll play along with me. I want to throw some words at you, and I just want to hear your definition or the first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready for this?
Okay,
I'm just
sure.
making these up. I don't have a list written down. Okay. Rhetoric.
Oh, and obviously, I have an immediate reaction and it's negative,
Okay.
which is probably incorrect, but to me, it's what people are saying that's the right thing to say at the time, and it's rhetoric, not a good word to me at all.
Right on. I concur. I do have a negative visceral reaction to the word, and then when you look it up, you're like, "Oh, did I get it right?" But it
Right.
sometimes can get used or misused in different sentences and different situations. Okay, here's a phrase that I use a lot, and that is paradigm shift.
Oh, I just think hard, really hard, and uh, and I know you do use it a lot, and many of us did, and I would say often incorrectly. However, it's what has to happen in so many areas, I think, and I think we are seeing paradigm shifts in major social contexts now, and I might even suggest all of them aren't necessarily positive. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's not
that's a
always
good
a
one.
good word either.
That's a good one. You said social context. I've been using social construct recently. So
Okay.
I've been trying to ignite this idea that menopause is actually a social construct. And yeah, I do talk about the true definition a lot, but it's a social construct that I don't know how we control or manage it going forward. Do you have thoughts when I say social construct?
Uh, the word construct to me is more of a definition of a way of thinking that means everything has to fit into a construct, that it's
Ah,
presupposed. So it doesn't mean that
yeah.
it's a bad word, but it means that's how I think of it. And I have had difficulty in my life with people who are construct thinkers. So
Mhm.
that's whereas I tend to stay away from the word, but obviously for a very personal bias. So I get
Yeah.
that too.
Wow. Okay. Learned this from you. What does it mean to be a forest thinker
Oh,
versus a tree thinker? Or I think you say forest person versus a tree person.
yes, that came from years of working with boards of directors. and talking with people about the fact that the board is really they're your forest people. They're the people that are looking at the big picture, the whole thing. They don't they don't need to drill down to the day to day. And it's become a really good term that I use with my daughter a lot, because she's a tree thinker and she gets very annoyed with the forest people who don't understand how hard it is for the trees to do all their forest thinking. So it's become a way to not be pejorative about terms, because we tend to think that the forest people are one kind of people, tree people are another, and one isn't necessarily better than the other. Whereas when we say big picture or small picture, that's the big picture guys are the good. It's all about words. It's all about being impeccable in your word. And that was the term that we found. Actually, it was from one of our board. I think Miranda was the first person who actually used that term, and she was a young woman on our board of directors who was brilliant, and we all wanted to know her because we thought she might be Prime Minister of Canada one day, but I'm not sure she's ever going to go that route. But she was very much a forest person, but understood how important it was that we could interpret from the forest to the trees in order to get the work done. So yeah,
big shout out to Miranda Lamb. Yes, indeed. And it's about, we're talking about some definitions of words right now, but now we're, you've taken me to the place of how can we shift from strategic to tactical, or how can we shift from big picture and visionary to, day to day, like your daughter so eloquently says. I mean, the world cannot get by. It's not one versus the other. It's one and the other.
Yes.
Yeah.
The brilliance of the and, not the tyranny of the or. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Right. You and I worked on a project of changing the name of an organization, and that was Vantage Point. Capital V, capital P. But the phrase I want to throw at you now is lowercase v and p. So what does Vantage Point mean to you?
It's really all about perspective. And we actually did take that term from the newsletter. It had been the name of the newsletter of the organization that at the time I came in was almost 70 years old. Like it was an organization that had been around for a long time. So that's where it came from. And it was really very much about everyone's different perspective, and what as the capital V, capital P Vantage Point could do was have the ability to come into a not-for-profit organization and spend time with them looking at what all the different vantage points were for their organization in order to help them go forward. Most of them their only vantage point was fund development, and we were way more focused on people development as opposed to fund development. And working with organizations to change that was really brilliant, and that's still what Vantage Point means to me. Every single issue has so many different perspectives, and there isn't one right perspective.
Yes.
Hardly ever. So, yeah.
Yeah. That is so relevant to the work that I'm trying to do and ignite and inspire. And that is, we always inevitably land in this place that everyone's journey is individual, and that individual vantage point needs to be heard, needs to be understood, and included in the way forward. So of course, I work with a lot of individual women on this, but I also work with physicians who have a very different vantage point, right? They see,
absolutely,
right? They see maybe 1,000 patients a year, but everyone in their waiting room or on their patient panel is coming to them because probably there's a problem that they want to have addressed. So it's very different than the rest of the world that's not interacting with them on a daily basis. And then I also work with organizations and companies who everybody that we're speaking of has a great intention when they come to the conversation, but a different vantage point.
Yes.
Yeah. So
and it's really hard for you to keep them all in mind, because different words work for each of those different, what can I say, different perspectives in the game. It's different for each of them. Hard for you.
Well, you've said the word hard, you said the word difficult, and we both use probably challenging and frustrating far too often. But I think that one of the things that we do share is that it's not impossible.
No. And we do have to be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
There are days when it appears like there is not an end in sight ever. And we have to realize that happens and move on anyway, as you do. I know you do.
Sage advice, sage advice. Thank you so much. I do want to use this opportunity to thank you for being on my team for 20 years. You are such a valued friend and beacon of light for me. And I didn't know when I met you 20 years ago that I couldn't have even imagined that we would be sitting down having this conversation today. But thank you for taking the time to do it.
You know, it was totally my pleasure, Cheryl. Thank you.
I love you. Thank you.
I love you too. Bye now.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. I know you have many options for where you spend your time, so I'm grateful that you chose this show. To learn more about the work that we do at Menopause Chicks, please visit menopausechicks.com. Follow me on social media at Menopause Chicks. And once again, I would like to thank all the people who support this show and share my mission for women's health. Vichy Laboratoire, FeraPro, Feel Amazing Vulva and Vaginal Moisturizer, and Intimate Wellbeing. You can learn more in the show notes. Plus a big shout out to the team here at Oh Boy Productions. And remember, someone you know needs to hear this conversation. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone you love. So thank you for sharing, and see you next week on This Show Is Not About Menopause. Amazing Vulva and Vaginal Moisturizer. What can I say? This might be one of the proudest projects from Menopause Chicks to date. A few years ago, I asked women what they wanted me to research. The answer was overwhelmingly another solution for vaginal dryness. That's because 86% of women experience vulva and vaginal dryness in postmenopause, and yet less than 4% have an easy, viable solution. And research shows hyaluronic acid is effective for both the prevention and treatment of dryness. So we took this challenge to a team of pharmacists who created Feel Amazing Vulva and Vaginal Moisturizer with hyaluronic acid and a little vitamin E. It's a product created by a community for its community. And you can learn more at moisturizeyourvagina.com.